Samuel by Jack London. Margaret Hanan would have been a striking figure under any circumstances, but never more so than when I first chanced upon her. A sack of grain of fully 100 weight on her shoulder, as she walked with sure though tottering stride from the cart tail to the stable, pausing for an instant to gather strength at the foot of the steep steps that led to the grain bin. There were 4 of these steps, and she went up them, a step at a time, slowly, unwaveringly, and with so dogged certitude that it never entered my mind that her strength could fail her, and let that 100 weight sack fall from the lean and withered frame that well nigh doubled under it. For she was patently an old woman, and it was her age that made me linger by the cart and watch. 6 times she went between the cart and the stable, each time with a full sack on her back, and beyond passing the time of day with me, she took no notice of my presence. Then, the cart empty, she fumbled for matches and lighted a short clay pipe, pressing down the burning surface of the tobacco with a calloused and apparently nerveless thumb. The hands were noteworthy. They were large-knuckled, sinewy, and malformed by labor, rhymed with calluses, the nails blunt and broken, and with here and there cuts and bruises, healed and healing, such as are common to the hands of hard-working men. On the back were huge, upstanding veins, eloquent of age and toil. Looking at them, it was hard to believe that they were the hands of the woman who had once been the belle of Island McGill. This last, of course, I learned later. At the time, I knew neither her history nor her identity. She wore heavy man's brogans. Her legs were stockingless, and I had noticed when she walked that her bare feet were thrust into the crinkly, iron-like shoes that sloshed about her lean ankles at every step. Her figure, shapeless and waistless, was garbed in a rough man's shirt and in a ragged flannel petticoat that had once been red. But it was her face, wrinkled, withered, and weather-beaten, surrounded by an aureole of unkempt and straggling wisps of grayish hair, that caught and held me. Neither drifted hair nor serried wrinkles could hide the splendid dome of a forehead, high and broad without verging in the slightest on the abnormal. The sunken cheeks and pinched nose told little of the quality of the life that flickered behind those clear blue eyes of hers. Despite the minuty of wrinklework that somehow failed to weazen them, her eyes were clear as a girl's, clear, outlooking, and far-seeing, and with an open and unblinking steadfastness of gaze that was disconcerting. The remarkable thing was the distance between them. It is a lucky man or woman who has the width of an eye between, but with Margaret Hanan the width between her eyes was fully that of an eye and a half. Yet so symmetrically molded was her face that this remarkable feature produced no uncanny effect, and, for that matter, would have escaped the casual observer's notice. The mouth, shapeless and toothless, with downturned corners and lips dry and parchment-like, nevertheless lacked the muscular slackness so usual with age. The lips might have been those of a mummy, save for that impression of rigid firmness they gave. Not that they were atrophied. On the contrary, they seemed tense and set with a muscular and spiritual determination. There, and in the eyes, was the secret of the certitude with which she carried the heavy sacks up the steep steps, with never a false step or overbalance, and emptied them in the grain bin. "You are an old woman to be working like this," I ventured. She looked at me with that strange, unblinking gaze, and she thought and spoke with the slow deliberateness that characterized everything about her, as if well aware of an eternity that was hers, and in which there was no need for haste. Again I was impressed by the enormous certitude of her. In this eternity that seemed so indubitably hers, there was time and to spare for safe footing and stable equilibrium, for certitude, in short. No more in her spiritual life than in carrying the 100 weights of grain was there a possibility of a misstep or an overbalancing. The feeling produced in me was uncanny. Here was a human soul that, save for the most glimmering of contacts, was beyond the humanness of me. And the more I learned of Margaret Hanan, in the weeks that followed, the more mysteriously remote she became. She was as alien as a far journeyer from some other star, and no hint could she nor all the countryside give me of what forms of living, what heats of feeling, or rules of philosophically contemplation, actuated her in all that she had been and was. "I wull be 72 come Good Friday a fortnight," she said in reply to my question. "But you are an old woman to be doing this man's work, and a strong man's work at that," I insisted. Again, she seemed to immerse herself in that atmosphere of contemplative eternity, and so strangely did it affect me that I should not have been surprised to have awaked a century, or so later, and found her just beginning to enunciate her reply. "The work has tull be done, and I am beholden tull no one. But have you no children, no family relations?" "Oh, I a plenty owe them, but they no see fut tull be help on me." She drew out her pipe for a moment, then added, with a nod of her head toward the house, I love with myself. I glanced at the house, straw-thatched and commodious, at the large stable, and at the large array of fields I knew must belong with the place. It is a big bit of land for you to farm by yourself. Oh, I, a bug but 70 acres. Ut kept me old moan buzzy, along with a son and a hired moan, tull say not extra hands on the harvest and a maid servant on the house. She clambered into the cart, gathered the reins in her hands, and quizzed me with her keen, shrewd eyes. Belike ye hail from over the water, Amaraki, I'm me none. Yes, I'm a Yankee, I answered. Ye will no be findin', Money Island McGill folks stoppin', Amaraki. No, I don't remember ever meeting one in the States. She nodded her head. They are home Leuven bodies, though I will no be sayin' they are no fair travelled. Yet they come home at the last, them Oz are no lost at sea or cult by fevers and such like unforeign parts. Then your sons will have gone to sea and come home again? I queried. Oh, I, all seven, Samuel Oz was drowned. At the mention of Samuel, I could have sworn to a strange light in her eyes, and it seemed to me, as by some telepathic flash, that I divined in her a tremendous wistfulness, an immense yearning. It seemed to me that here was the key to her inscrutableness, the clue that if followed properly would make all her strangeness plain. It came to me that here was a contact, and that for the moment I was glimpsing into the soul of her. The question was tickling on my tongue, but she forestalled me. She tchk'd to the horse, and with a gooey day tull you, sir, drove off. A simple, homely people are the folk of Island McGill, and I doubt if a more sober, thrifty, and industrious folk is to be found in all the world. Meeting them abroad, and to meet them abroad one must meet them on the sea, for a hybrid seafaring and farmer breed are they, one would never take them to be Irish. Irish they claim to be, speaking of the north of Ireland with pride and sneering at their Scottish brothers. Yet Scotch they undoubtedly are, transplanted Scotch of long ago, it is true, but none the less Scotch with 1,000 traits, to say nothing of their tricks of speech and woolly utterance, which nothing less than their Scotch clannishness could have preserved to this late day. A narrow loch, scarcely half a mile wide, separates Island McGill from the mainland of Ireland, and once across this loch, one finds himself in an entirely different country. The Scotch impression is strong, and the people to commence with are Presbyterians. When it is considered that there is no public house in all the island, and that 7,000 souls dwell therein, some idea may be gained of the temperateness of the community. Wedded to old ways, public opinion and the ministers are powerful influences, while fathers and mothers are revered and obeyed as in few other places in this modern world. Courting lasts never later than 10 at night, and no girl walks out with her young man without her parents' knowledge and consent. The young men go down to the sea and sow their wild oats in the wicked ports, returning periodically, between voyages, to live the old intensive morality, to court till 10 o'clock, to sit under the minister each Sunday, and to listen at home to the same stern precepts that the elders preached to them from the time they were laddies. Much they learned of women in the ends of the earth, these seafaring sons, yet a canny wisdom was theirs, and they never brought wives home with them. The one solitary exception to this had been the schoolmaster, who had been guilty of bringing a wife from half a mile the other side of the loch. For this he had never been forgiven, and he rested under a cloud for the remainder of his days. At his death, the wife went back across the loch to her own people, and the blot on the escutcheon of Island McGill was erased. In the end, the sailormen married girls of their own homeland and settled down to become exemplars of all the virtues for which the island was noted. Island McGill was without a history. She boasted none of the events that go to make history. There had never been any wearing of the green, any Fenian conspiracies, any land disturbances. There had been but one eviction, and that purely technical, a test case, and on advice of the tenant's lawyer. So Island McGill was without annals. History had passed her by. She paid her taxes, acknowledged her crowned rulers, and left the world alone. All she asked in return was that the world should leave her alone. The world was composed of two parts, Island McGill and the rest of it. And whatever was not Island McGill was outlandish and barbarian, and well she knew, for did not her seafaring sons bring home report of that world and its ungodly ways? It was from the skipper of a Glasgow tramp, as passenger from Colombo to Rangoon, that I had first learned of the existence of Island McGill, and it was from him that I had carried the letter that gave me entrance to the house of Mrs. Ross, widow of a master mariner, with a daughter living with her and with two sons, master mariners themselves, and out upon the sea. Mrs. Ross did not take in boarders, and it was Captain Ross's letter alone that had enabled me to get from her bed and board. In the evening, after my encounter with Margaret Hanan, I questioned Mrs. Ross, and I knew on the instant that I had in truth stumbled upon mystery. Like all island McGill folk, as I was soon to discover, Mrs. Ross was at first averse to discussing Margaret Henan at all. Yet it was from her I learned that evening that Margaret Henan had once been one of the island belles. Herself the daughter of a well-to-do farmer, she had married Thomas Henan, equally well-to-do. Beyond the usual housewife's tasks, she had never been accustomed to work. Unlike many of the island women, she had never lent a hand in the fields. But what of her children? I asked. The sons, Jamie and Timothy us married and begown Tulsi. Thought Bughouse closed tull the post office us Jamie s. The daughters thought ha no married be Luvan, what them as dud marry. And the rest be dead. The Samuels, Clara interpolated, with what I suspected was a giggle. She was Mrs. Ross's daughter, a strapping young woman with handsome features and remarkably handsome black eyes. "'Tis not to be smuckerun aught," her mother reproved her. "The Samuels," I intervened, "I don't understand. Her 4 sons thought died. And were they all named Samuel?" "Zai." "Strange," I commented in the lagging silence. "Very strange," Mrs. Ross affirmed, proceeding stolidly with the knitting of the woolen singlet on her knees, one of the countless undergarments that she interminably knitted for her skipper sons. "And it was only the Samuels that died?" I queried in further attempt. "The others loved," was the answer. "A fine family, no finer on the island, no better lauds ever sailed out of Island McGill. The Munster held them up Oz models tull pattern after, nor was ever a whisper breathed again the girls." "But why is she left alone now in her old age?" I persisted. "Why don't her own flesh and blood look after her? Why does she live alone? Don't they ever go to see her or care for her?" "Never a one 20 years and more now. She fetched out on Tull herself. She drove them from the house just as she drove old Tom Henan, thought was her husband, Tull whose death." "Drink," I ventured. Mrs. Ross shook her head scornfully, as if drink was a weakness beneath the weakest of Island McGill. A long pause followed, during which Mrs. Ross knitted stolidly on, only nodding permission when Clara's young man, mate on one of the Shire Line sailing ships, came to walk out with her. I studied the half-dozen ostrich eggs, hanging in the corner against the wall like a cluster of some monstrous fruit. On each shell were painted precipitous and impossible seas through which full-rigged ships foamed with a lack of perspective, only equaled by their sharp technical perfection. On the mantelpiece stood 2 large pearl shells, obviously a pair, intricately carved by the patient hands of New Caledonian convicts. In the center of the mantel was a stuffed bird of paradise, while about the room were scattered gorgeous shells from the southern seas, delicate sprays of coral sprouting from barnacled pai shells encased in glass, assegais from South Africa, stone axes from New Guinea, huge Alaskan tobacco pouches beaded with heraldic totem designs, a boomerang from Australia, divers ships in glass bottles, a cannibal kai bowl from the Marquesas, and fragile cabinets from China and the Indies, and inlaid with mother-of-pearl and precious woods. I gazed at this varied trove brought home by sailor sons, and pondered the mystery of Margaret Henan, who had driven her husband to his death and been forsaken by all her kin. It was not the drink. Then what was it? Some shocking cruelty? Some amazing infidelity? Or some fearful, old-world peasant crime? I broached my theories, but to all Mrs. Ross shook her head. "It was no thought," she said. "Margaret was a gooid wife and a gooid mother, and I doubt she would harm a fly. She brought up her family God-fearin' and decent-minded. Her trouble was thought she took lunatic turned idiot." Mrs. Ross tapped significantly on her forehead to indicate a state of addlement. "But I talked with her this afternoon," I objected, "and I found her a sensible woman, remarkably bright for one of her years." I'm grantin' all thought you say," she went on calmly. "But I'm no referrin' tull thought. I'm referrin' tull her wuct-headed and vicious stubbornness. No more stubborn woman ever loved than Margaret Henan. Ut was all on account o' Samuel, which was the name o' her youngest and they do say her favourite brother. Oz died by whose own hund all through the Munsters mustake no register run, the new church at Dublin. Ut was a lesson thought the name was musfortunate, but she would no take ut. And there was talk when she called her first child Samuel. Thought died o' the croup. And what does she do but call the next one Samuel, and only 3 when he fell untull the tub o' hot water, and was plain cooked tull death. It all come, I tell you, o' her wuct-headed and foolish stubbornness. For a Samuel she must have, and ut was the death of the 4 of her sons. After the first, dudna her own mother go down on the dirt tull her feet, begun and pleadun, wath her no tull name her next one Samuel, but she was no tull be turned from her purpose. Margaret Hanan was always set on her ways, and never more so thon on thought name Samuel. She was fair lunatic on Samuel. Dudna her neighbors, and all cuth and cun savon them thought loved on the house with her, get up and walk out ot the christenun of the second. Hum thought was cooked, thought they dud, and ot the very moment the minister asked what would the bairn's name be. Samuel, says she, and what thought they got up and walked out and left the house. And ot the door dudna her Aunt Fanny, her mother's suster, turn and say loud for all tull hear, what for wull she be wantin' tull murder the wee thing? The minister heard fine and dudna like ut, but as he told my Larry afterward what could he do? Ut was the woman's wush, and there was no law again, a mother Callan her child accordin tull her wush. And then was there no the third Samuel. And when he was lost at sea off the Cape, dudna she break all laws o nature tull have a fourth? She was 47, I'm tellin' ye, and she had a child at 47. Thunk on ut, at 47, ut was fair scandalous. From Clara, next morning, I got the tale of Margaret Hanan's favorite brother, and from here and there, in the week that followed, I pieced together the tragedy of Margaret Hanan. Samuel Dundee had been the youngest of Margaret's 4 brothers, and, as Clara told me, she had well nigh worshipped him. He was going to sea at the time, skipper of one of the sailing ships of the Bank Line, when he married Agnes Hewitt. She was described as a slender wisp of a girl, delicately featured and with a nervous organization of the supersensitive order. Theirs had been the first marriage in the new church, and after 2 weeks, honeymoon Samuel had kissed his bride goodbye and sailed in command of the Luftbank, a big 4-masted bark. And it was because of the new church that the minister's blunder occurred. Nor was it the blunder of the minister alone, as one of the elders later explained, for it was equally the blunder of the whole presbytery of Coughlin, which included 15 churches on Island McGill and the mainland. The old church, beyond repair, had been torn down, and the new one built on the original foundation. Looking upon the foundation stones as similar to a ship's keel, it never entered the minister's nor the presbytery's head that the new church was legally any other than the old church. And 3 couples was married the first week on the new church, Clara said. First of all, Samuel Dundee and Agnes Hewitt, the next day Albert Mahan and Minnie Duncan, and by the weekend Eddie Troy and Flo McIntosh, all sailormen, and unsucks weeks time the last of them back tull their ships in awa, and no one o' them dreamin' of the wuckness they'd been aught. The imp of the perverse must have chuckled at the situation. All things favored. The marriages had taken place in the first week of May, and it was not till 3 months later that the minister, as required by law, made his quarterly report to the civil authorities in Dublin. Promptly came back the announcement that his church had no legal existence, not being registered according to the law's demands. This was overcome by prompt registration, but the marriages were not to be so easily remedied. The 3 sailor husbands were away, and their wives, in short, were not their wives. But the minister was no for alarmin' the bodies, said Clara. He kept whose counsel and bided whose time, waitin' for the lads tull be back from sea. As luck would have it, he was away across the island tull a Christenun, when Albert Mahan arrives home wunxpected, whose shup just docked at Dublin. Ut's 9 o'clock at night when the minister, whose sluppers and dress-un gown, gets the news. Up he jumps and calls for horse and saddle, and awa he goes like the one for Albert Mahan, S. Albert is just gown, tull bed and has one shoe off when the minister arrives. Come with me the pair o' ye, says he breathless like. What for and me dead weary and gown tull bed, says Albert. Ye'll be lawful married, says the minister. Albert looks black and says, now, minister, ye will be jokin'. But tull himself, as I've heard hum tell many a time, he us wonder run, thought the minister should a took tull wusky at whose time o' life. We be no married, says Minnie. He shook his head. And I no Mussus Mahan? No, says he, ye are no Mussus Mahan, ye are plain Mus Duncan. But ye married us yorsel, says she. I dudna, says he. And what thought he tells them the whole upshot, and Albert puts on whose shoe, and they go with the minister in, are married proper and lawful, and Oz Albert Mahan says afterward mun is the time. Tus no every moan thought has 2 weddin' nights on Island McGill. 6 months later Eddie Troy came home and was promptly remarried, but Samuel Dundee was away on a 3 years voyage and his ship fell overdue. Further to complicate the situation, a baby boy, past 2 years old, was waiting for him in the arms of his wife. The months passed, and the wife grew thin with worrying. Ut's no myself I'm thunkin' on, she is reported to have said many times, but ut's the pure fatherless bairn. Ought happened tull Samuel where wull the bairn stond. Lloyd's posted the Luftbank as missing, and the owners ceased the monthly remittance of Samuel's half-pay to his wife. It was the question of the child's legitimacy that preyed on her mind, and, when all hope of Samuel's return was abandoned, she drowned herself and the child in the loch. And here enters the greater tragedy. The Luftbank was not lost. By a series of sea disasters and delays too interminable to relate, she had made one of those long, unsighted passages, such as occur once or twice in half a century. How the imp must have held both his sides. Back from the sea came Samuel, and when they broke the news to him, something else broke somewhere in his heart or head. Next morning they found him where he had tried to kill himself across the grave of his wife and child. Never in the history of Ireland, McGill was there so fearful a deathbed. He spat in the minister's face and reviled him, and died blaspheming so terribly that those that tended on him did so with averted gaze and trembling hands. And in the face of all this, Margaret Hanan named her first child Samuel. How account for the woman's stubbornness? Or was it a morbid obsession that demanded a child of hers should be named Samuel? Her third child was a girl, named after herself, and the fourth was a boy again. Despite the strokes of fate that had already bereft her, and despite the loss of friends and relatives, she persisted in her resolve to name the child after her brother. She was shunned at church by those who had grown up with her. Her mother, after a final appeal, left her house with the warning that if the child were so named, she would never speak to her again. And though the old lady lived 30-odd years longer, she kept her word. The minister agreed to christen the child any name but Samuel, and every other minister on island, McGill refused to christen it by the name she had chosen. There was talk on the part of Margaret Hanan of going to law at the time, but in the end she carried the child to Belfast and there had it christened Samuel. And then nothing happened. The whole island was confuted. The boy grew and prospered. The schoolmaster never ceased averring that it was the brightest lad he had ever seen. Samuel had a splendid constitution, a tremendous grip on life. To everybody's amazement, he escaped the usual run of childish afflictions. Measles, whooping cough, and mumps knew him not. He was armor-clad against germs, immune to all disease. Headaches and earaches were things unknown. Never so much as a boil or a pumple, as one of the old bodies told me, ever marred his healthy skin. He broke school records in scholarship and athletics and whipped every boy of his size or years on Island McGill. It was a triumph for Margaret Hanan. This paragon was hers, and it bore the cherished name. With the one exception of her mother, friends and relatives drifted back and acknowledged that they had been mistaken, though there were old crones who still abided by their opinion and who shook their heads ominously over their cups of tea. The boy was too wonderful to last. There was no escaping the curse of the name his mother had wickedly laid upon him. The young generation joined Margaret Hanan in laughing at them, but the old crones continued to shake their heads. Other children followed. Margaret Hanan's fifth was a boy, whom she called Jamie, and in rapid succession followed three girls, Alice, Sarah, and Nora, the boy Timothy, and two more girls, Florence and Katie. Katie was the last and 11th, and Margaret Hanan, at 35, ceased from her exertions. She had done well by Island, McGill, and the Queen. 9 healthy children were hers. All prospered. It seemed her ill luck had shot its bolt with the deaths of her first 2. 9 lived, and one of them was named Samuel. Jamie elected to follow the sea, though it was not so much a matter of election as compulsion. For the eldest sons on Island, McGill remained on the land, while all other sons went to the salt plowing. Timothy followed Jamie, and by the time the latter had got his first command, a steamer in the bay trade out of Cardiff, Timothy was mate of a big sailing ship. Samuel, however, did not take kindly to the soil. The farmer's life had no attraction for him. His brothers went to sea, not out of desire, but because it was the only way for them to gain their bread. And he, who had no need to go, envied them when, returned from far voyages, they sat by the kitchen fire and told their bold tales of the wonderlands beyond the sea rim. Samuel became a teacher, much to his father's disgust, and even took extra certificates, going to Belfast for his examinations. When the old master retired, Samuel took over his school. Secretly, however, he studied navigation, and it was Margaret's delight when he sat by the kitchen fire, and, despite their master's tickets, tangled up his brothers in the theoretics of their profession. Tom Hanan alone was outraged when Samuel, school teacher, gentleman, and heir to the Hanan farm, shipped to sea before the mast. Margaret had an abiding faith in her son's star, and whatever he did she was sure was for the best. Like everything else connected with his glorious personality, there had never been known so swift a rise as in the case of Samuel. Barely with 2 years sea experience before the mast, he was taken from the forecastle and made a provisional second mate. This occurred in a fever port on the west coast, and the committee of skippers that examined him agreed that he knew more of the science of navigation than they had remembered or forgotten. 2 years later, he sailed from Liverpool, mate of the Starry Grace, with both Master, S, and Extra Master's tickets in his possession. And then it happened, the thing the old crones had been shaking their heads over for years. It was told me by Gavin McNabb, bosun of the Starry Grace at the time, himself an Island McGill man. "Well, do I remember he said. "We was runnin' our eastern down, and mackin' heavy weather of Oz finest sailor moan Oz ever walked with Samuel Hanan. I remember the look of hum Wall thought last marnin', a watchin' them bugseas curlin' up astern, and a watchin' the old girl and seein' how she took them. The scupper down below and drunken for days. Was 7 thought Hanan brought her up on Tull the Wund, not Darun, Tull run longer on thought fearful sea. 8 after havin' breakfast he turns and a half hour after up comes the scupper, bleary-eyed and shaky and holden on Tull the companion. Was fair smokin', I tellin' ye, and there he stood, blunkin' and noddin' and talkin' Tull humsel. "Keep off," says he last Tull the moan the wheel. "My God," says the second mate standin' beside hum. The scupper never looks Tull hum at all but keeps on mutterun and jabberun Tull humsel. All of a sudden like he straightens up and throws whose head back and says, "Put your wheel over me moan, now dom ye, are ye deef thought ye'll no be hearin' me?" Was a drunken moan's luck, for the starry grace wore off afore thought God Almighty gale without shuppin', a bucket o' water, the second mate shoutin' orders and the crew jumpin' like Maud. And what thought the scupper nods contented like Tull himself and goes below after more whisky. Was plain murder o' the lives o' all of us, for was no the time for the buggest shup afloat Tull be runnin'. Run, never have I seen the like. Was beyond all thunkun, and me gown Tull sea, boy and men for 40 year. I tell you was fair awesome. The face o' the second mate was white Oz death, and he stood out alone for half an hour, when was too much for hum, and he went below and called Samuel and the third. A fine sailor moan thought Samuel, but was too much for hum. He looked and studied, but he could no see whose way. He durst na heave Tull. She would hob and sweep would all Hans and stucks and everything afore she could fetched up. There was not Tull do but keep on runnin'. And worsened we were lost ony way, for soon or late that overtaken sea was sure Tull sweep us clear over poop and all. Did I say was a God Almighty gale? Was worse nor thought. The devil himself must ha had a hund on the bruin. Was thought fearsome. I looked on some sights, but I no curran, Tull look on the like thought again. No moan dared Tull be whose bunk. No, nor no moan on the decks. All Hans of us stood on top the house and held on and watched. The 3 mates was on the poop, with 2 men at the wheel, and the only moan below was thought wusky-blighted Captain Snorin, drunk. And then I see come on, a mile away, rissin' above all the waves like an island on the sea, the buggest wave ever I looked upon. The 3 mates stood together and watched come on, a prayin' like we thought she would no break unpass on us. But was no Tull be. At the last, when she rose up like a mountain, curlin' above the stern and blottin' out the sky, the mates scattered, the second and third runnin' for the mizzen shrouds and climmin' up, but the first runnin' Tull the wheel Tull lend a hund. He was a brave man, thought Samuel Hanan. He run straight until the face thought father all waves, no thunkun on himself but thunkun only the shup. The 2 men was lashed Tull the wheel, but he would be ready Tull hund on the case they was colt. And then she took we on the house could no see the poop for the 1,000 tons water thought hod hud Thought wave cleaned them out, took everything along with The 2 mates climmin' up the mizzen ruggun, Samuel Hanan runnin' Tull the wheel, the 2 men at the wheel, and the wheel itself. We never saw aught o' them, for she broached Tull would the wheel gown, and 2 men us was drowned off the house. No Tull mentioned the carpenter thought we pucked up at the break the poop with every bone whose body broke Tull he was like so much jelly. And here enters the marvel of it, the miraculous wonder of that woman's heroic spirit. Margaret Hanan was 47 when the news came home of the loss of Samuel, and it was not long after that the unbelievable rumor went around Island McGill. I say unbelievable. Island McGill would not believe. Dr. Hall pooh-poohed it. Everybody laughed at it as a good joke. They traced back the gossip to Sarah Dack, servant to the Hanans, and who alone lived with Margaret and her husband. But Sarah Dack persisted in her assertion and was called a low-mouthed liar. 1 or 2 dared question Tom Hanan himself, but beyond black looks and curses for their presumption, they elicited nothing from him. The rumor died down, and the island fell to discussing in all its ramifications the loss of the Grenoble in the China seas, with all her officers and half her crew born and married on Island McGill. But the rumor would not stay down. Sarah Dack was louder in her assertions. The looks Tom Hannon cast about him were blacker than ever, and Dr. Hall, after a visit to the Hannon house, no longer pooh-poohed. Then Island McGill sat up, and there was a tremendous wagging of tongues. It was unnatural and ungodly. The like had never been heard. And when, as time passed, the truth of Sarah Dack's utterances was manifest, the island folk decided, like the bosun of the Starry Grace, that only the devil could have had a hand in so untoward a happening. And the infatuated woman, so Sarah Dack reported, insisted that it would be a boy. 11 bairns ha I born, she said. 6 o them lossies and 5 o them lotties. And since there be balance on all things, so will there be balance with me. 6 o one and half a dozen o the other, there is the balance, and Oz sure Oz the sun rises on the marnin, thought sure will it be a boy. And boy it was, and a prodigy. Dr. Hall raved about its unblemished perfection and massive strength, and wrote a brochure on it for the Dublin Medical Society as the most interesting case of the sort in his long career. When Sarah Dack gave the babes unbelievable weight, Island McGill refused to believe, and once again called her liar. But when Dr. Hall attested that he had himself weighed it and seen it tip that very notch, Island McGill held its breath and accepted whatever report Sarah Dack made of the infant's progress or appetite. And once again Margaret Hannon carried a babe to Belfast and had it christened Samuel. Osgood Osgold it was, said Sarah Dack to me. Sarah, at the time I met her, was a buxom, phlegmatic spinster of 60, equipped with an experience so tragic and unusual that though her tongue ran on for decades, its output would still be of imperishable interest to her cronies. Osgood, said Sarah Dack. Ut never fretted. Sut ut down on the sun by the hour, and never a sound ut would make Oz long Oz ut was no hungered. And thought strong, the grup Ut's Hans was like a moans. I mind me, when Ut was but hours old, Ut grupped me so mighty thought I fetched a scream I was thought frightened. Ut was the punk health. Ut slept and ate and grew, Ut never bothered. Never a night's sleep Ut lost tull no one, nor ever among Uts, and thought wuth cuttin' Ut's teeth and all. And Margaret would dandle Ut on her knee and ask was there ever so fine a laddie on the 3 kingdoms. The way Ut grew, Ut was unkeepun wuth the way Ut ate. Odd a year Ut was the size o' a bairn of 2. Ut was slow tull walk and talk. Exceptun for gurgly noises un Ut's throat and for creepun on all fours, Ut dudna manage much on the walkun and talkun line. But thought was tull be expected from the way Ut grew. Ut all went tull growin, strong and healthy, and even old Tom Hannon cheered up at the might of Ut and said was there ever the like o' Ut on the 3 kingdoms. Ut was Dr. Hall thought first suspicioned. I mind me well, though Ut was little I dreamt what he was up tull at the time. I see him holdin' thungs, unfronto little Sammy's eyes, and amackin' noises, loud and soft, and far and near, unlittle Sammy's ears. And then I see Dr. Hall go away, runklun whose eyebrows and shakun whose head like the bairn was Alun. But he was no Alun, as I could swear tull, me Asian hum eat and grow. But Dr. Hall no said a word tull Margaret, and I was no for guessun, the why he was sore puzzled. I mind me when little Sammy first spoke. He was 2 years old and the size of a child o' 5, though he could no manage the walkun, yet but went around on all fours, happy and contented like and macun, no trouble Oz long Oz he was fed promptly, which was onasul often. I was hangun the wash on the line at the time when out he comes on all fours, whose bughead wagon, tull and fro and blunkun on the sun. And then sudden he talked. I was thought took aback I near died o' fright, and fine I knew Ut then, the shakun o' Dr. Hall's head. Talked, never a bairn on Island McGill talked so loud and tull such purpose. There was no musticun Ut, I stood there all tremblun and shakun. Little Sammy was brayun. I tell you, sir, he was brayun like an ass, just like thought, loud and long and cheerful tull Ut seemed whose lungs Ud crack. He was a idiot, a great, awful, monster idiot. Ut was after he talked thought Dr. Hall told Margaret, but she would no believe. Ut would all come right, she said. Ut was growin' too fast for aught else. Guv Ut time, said she, and we would see. But old Tom Hannon knew, and he never held up whose head again. He could no abide the thung, and would no brung humsel, tull touch Ut, though I own no denian, he was fair fascinated by Ut. Mony the time I see hum watchin' of Ut around a corner, lookin', Ut tull whose eyes fair bulged wuth the horror. And when Ut braid old Tom Ud stuck whose fungers tull whose ears and look thought miserable I could a pootied hum. And bray Ut could, Ut was the only thung Ut could do besides eat and grow. Whenever Ut was hungry Ut brayed, and there was no stoppin' Ut save wuth food. And always of a marnon, when first ut crawled tull the cutchen door and blunked out at the sun, ut braid. And ut was brayan that brought about ut's end. I mind me well, ut was 3 years old and Oz bug Ozaleto 10. Old Tom he been gown from bed tull worse, plowin' up and down the fields and talkin' and mutter run tull himself. On the marnon, oh the day I mind me, he was suttin' on the bench outside the cutchen, a futtin, the handle tull a puckax. Unbeknown, the monster idiot crawled tull the door and braid after whose fashion ought the sun. I see old Tom start up and look. And there was the monster idiot, wagon, ut's bug head and blunkun and brayan like the great bug ass ut was. Ut was too much for Tom. Somethin' went wrong with hum sudden like. He jumped tull whose feet and fetched the puck handle down on the monster idiot's head. And he hut ut again and again like ut was a mod dog and hum afeard o ut. And he went straight tull the stable and hung humsel tull a rafter. And I was no for stoppin' on after such like, and I went tull stay along with me suster thought was married tull John Martin and comfortable off. I sat on the bench by the kitchen door and regarded Margaret Hanan, while with her callous thumb she pressed down the live fire of her pipe and gazed out across the twilight-sombered fields. It was the very bench Tom Hanan had sat upon that last sanguinary day of life, and Margaret sat in the doorway where the monster, blinking at the sun, had so often wagged its head and brayed. We had been talking for an hour, she with that slow certitude of eternity that so befitted her, and for the life of me, I could lay no finger on the motives that ran through the tangled warp and woof of her. Was she a martyr to truth? Did she have it in her to worship at so abstract a shrine? Had she conceived abstract truth to be the one high goal of human endeavor on that day of long ago, when she named her firstborn Samuel? Or was hers the stubborn obstinacy of the ox, the fixity of purpose of the balky horse, the stolidity of the self-willed peasant mind? Was it whim or fancy, the one streak of lunacy in what was otherwise an eminently rational mind? Or, reverting, was hers the spirit of a Bruno? Was she convinced of the intellectual rightness of the stand she had taken? Was hers a steady, enlightened opposition to superstition? Or, and a subtler thought, was she mastered by some vaster, profounder superstition, a fetish worship of which the Alpha and the Omega was the cryptic Samuel? "Will ye be tellin' me," she said, "thought if the second Samuel had been named Larry thought he would no have fell in the hot water and drownded. Atween you and me, sir, and ye are intelligent lookin' till the eye, would the name have made ut anyways different? Would the washin' no be done thought day if he had been Larry or Michael? Would hot water no be hot, and would hot water no burn if he had any other name but Samuel?" I acknowledged the justice of her contention, and she went on. "Do a wee bit of a name change the plans, O God? Do the world run by hut or muss, and be God a weak, shully-shallion creature thought ud alter the fate and destiny o' thungs, because the worm Margaret Hanan seen fut tull name her bairn Samuel? There be my son Jamie. He will no sign a Russian fun on whose crew, because believe un, thought Russian funs do be monajan, the ones in, have the macan o' bad weather. Will you be thunkin' so? Will you be thunkin', thought God thought, makes the ones tull blow while bend whose head from on high tull lussin tull the word a greasy Russian fun on some dirty shup's forecastle." I said no, certainly not, but she was not to be set aside from pressing home the point of her argument. "Then will you be thunkin', thought God thought directs the stars on their courses, and tull whose mighty foot the world is but a footstool? Will you be thunkin', thought he will take a spite again, Margaret Hanan, and send a bug wave off the Cape tull wash her son untull eternity, all because she was for Naaman hum Samuel." "But why Samuel?" I asked. "And thought I didn't know, I wanted it so." "But why did you want it so?" And us up me thought would be answerun a such like question, be there ony moan luvan or dead thought can answer? Who can tell the why like, my Jamie was fair daft on buttermilk, he would drunk ut tull, as he said himself, whose back teeth was awash. But my Tumothi could no abide buttermilk. I like tull lussin tull the thunder growlin and roarin and rampajun. My Katy could no abide the noise of ut, but must scream and flutter and go runnin for the mudmost o' a featherbed. Never yet have I heard the answer tull the why like, God alone has thought answer. You and me be mortal and we canna know. Enough for us tull know what we like and what we dislike. I like thought as the first word and the last. And behind thought like no men can go and find the ut. I like Samuel and I like ut well. Ut is a sweet name, and there be a rollin' wonder on the sound o, ut thought passes understandin'. The twilight deepened, and in the silence I gazed upon that splendid dome of a forehead which time could not mar, at the width between the eyes and at the eyes themselves, clear, outlooking, and wide-seeing. She rose to her feet with an air of dismissing me, saying, It will be a dark walk home, and there will be more than a sprunkle o' wet in the sky. Have you any regrets, Margaret Hanan? I asked, suddenly and without forethought. She studied me a moment. I thought I know ha born another son. And you would, I faltered. I thought I would, she answered. Would ha been whose name? I went down the dark road between the hawthorn hedges, puzzling over the why of like, repeating Samuel to myself and aloud, and listening to the rolling wonder in its sound that had charmed her soul and led her life in tragic places. Samuel, there was a rolling wonder in the sound. There was.